Hi, everybody. Oh, I can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Marcus Fairs. I'm editor-in-chief of Design, the online architecture and design magazine. And I'm delighted to share the stage on the first day of 100% Design with a fantastic designer and a good friend, actually, Yves Behar, who's flown over from California to be in London this week. I'll introduce you to Yves in a minute, but what we're going to do, we're going to talk for about 45 minutes, something like that, and then there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. Yves going to show a loop of images of his work, and then we're going to talk about his work as a designer and his philosophy and his thoughts about where design is going in the 21st century, because Yves spends a lot of time thinking about and actually leading the vanguard of industrial design. So, hey, Yves, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you do? How do you describe your work?
So I'm Swiss from Lausanne, but I immigrated in the early 90s to Silicon Valley, San Francisco. And so I really kind of grew up as a designer in the Bay Area, in the spirit of technology and entrepreneurship. And in many ways, it's a whole set of tools that are acquired there, you know, digital tools, new business tools, and maybe an attitude which in a way has permeated, you know, my design work and has given me, you know, what I think is overall a different approach in the way that we run the studio, in the way that we interact with our clients. Yeah,
And the Fuse Project, that's the name of your company?
Yeah, Fuse Project is the name of the company. We do both physical products, but also we are building now digital products. And we tend to work a really long time with the people that we work with. We have a partnership model with them.
Do you ever think what would have happened if you hadn't left Europe? Because, you know, Europe is known as for the great, cool modernism, design, Bauhaus, the whole heritage, and the furniture. America's kind of not as active in that sense. But you mentioned as well that California, where you ended up, had the whole Silicon Valley thing going on. So, what might have happened if you hadn't gone there? And how did that environment on the West Coast influence what you've become?
You know, it's hard to. I mean, it's hard to tell. It's hard to. I think what moving to California has done for me is that it has put me, first of all, as I was saying, in front of a whole new field that needed design. So, technology was not designed, you know, in the early '90s. Computers were not in your home. Devices were not in your pocket or on your wrist. And being a part of that, in many ways, is a whole new field of design that has emerged out of that. And I could anticipate that that was needed. And in a way, I mean, what I often say is that I'm actually an economic refugee from Switzerland working in California. Because, to be very honest, there isn't this kind of industry in Switzerland that can support the kind of experimentation, the kind of sort of a long view that companies are taking over there. So I would probably be a very, very small studio, maybe me and a couple of interns, you know, versus having a larger scale operations that allows me to do all these different things.
So in the early days then, were you working for some of the startups? Were you working for the computer companies? What kind of projects did you get involved with that you couldn't have got involved with elsewhere in the world?
So in the early days, what I found fascinating, you know, again, it's 20 years ago, but the first studio I got into, I started working at, they were working on mostly exhibit design and furniture design. And actually they were working with Herman Miller, which was you know, in a way, back then it was a discovery. You know, all the work that had been done, you know, by Charles Eames and George Nelson in the you know, 50s and 60s had been almost a bit forgotten by the early 90s because the work wasn't in distribution, wasn't widely distributed then, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I discovered in a sense, sort of furniture design, exhibit design, and then I worked with consultants like Frog Design and Luna Design for companies like Apple and Hewlett-Packard and Silicon Graphics. And again, but in the very early days when people were thinking about, you know, the computer, the desktop computer, going from being an object you have in a workplace, an object you have in a back room, to an object that now is living with you, that you can carry around. I think the first year that I joined Lunar, the first laptop was being developed for Apple. The first laptop computer was being developed then. So this whole field of things being portable, things you carry with you, things you touch, things where you integrate technology, and is something that I experienced in it since its early days.
And what was the mood amongst those computer companies towards design? Did they get it? Did they think, who's this guy from Europe telling me about form and tactility and things like that? Or did they inherently understand that it would help them sell products and make things better for consumers?
Well, some of them got it, but the vast majority didn't get it. And it's, honestly, it wasn't that different from the way large industry in Europe doesn't get, I'm talking about large industry, I'm not talking about, furniture and home accessory companies that we think are big and important. I mean, they're tiny relative to large, European industry or global industry. And, it's not that different from the way, a lot of large industry in Europe sees design today as really just something to kind of, do at the end, something to kind of, a bit as an add-on. I mean, that is a reality that we still live, I think, in Europe. But in the US, it was the same thing. And essentially, the only company that got it back then was pretty much Steve Jobs and Apple. At the time, they were using many different design firms, and mostly Frog Design as Steve Jobs' partner in the early days of the Mac. Most of the time, I would go to companies and I would be in the room, I would be surrounded by business people, and they would look at me and they would say, what's the return on investment for design? I mean, it's just, they really did not understand what we were doing there. It was not a factor in determining a company's success, in determining, why you would do things or how you would approach a user. I mean, it was really not a factor. And so I had to battle through these years of having to, prove to people that design actually brings a lot of value, creates a lot of value. And obviously, we got a lot of help since Apple has, for the last 10 years, has really done so well. Now, design is a model. Design is at the forefront. Design is on the board of companies. Design is part of truly building businesses.
So that conversation is getting easier then, is it, with companies?
Well, definitely, absolutely. I mean, it's funny now because I have a lot of clients from Europe, and they're looking for, they're trying to sort of look at the way Apple works, and they're trying to put designers back in a leadership position, in a driving position rather than in a following position within those businesses. And I mean, that means a huge change for us designers.
One of the big things about the Apple story of the last year or so is that it's become quite clear that rivals to Apple, instead of innovating in their own directions, have just, according to Apple, copied large chunks of their interaction design, large chunks of their forms. How do you feel about that? I mean, it's hard to innovate, isn't it? It's hard to push the boundaries of design forward.
It's hard. It demands, a full commitment from a business standpoint. The investments are immense. I mean, they're incredible. The investments in, sort of the underlying technologies to do something a little different in this way or that way. But I think people are getting it now. I mean, I think, the leadership that Apple has taken, of course, makes a lot of companies want to emulate. They're trying to be similar. But what I'm often saying is it's kind of ridiculous because we only point at, when we think about good design in the field of technology, we look at Apple and then we think that's the only way. We think Apple is the only way to have good design and good technology married together. And what I often say is there's 5 or 6 different ways to do what Apple is doing. So when business people, when companies come to us and say, oh, we want to be like Apple, I always say, I always say no. You have to find your own direction. You have to find your own, your own vision of who you want to be.
And part of your role as a designer is to help them find that vision.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there are ways. I mean, for example, we built Jawbone as a brand. It was a startup that had never created a product. I've been working with them for 10 years. And, the notion that, design is just this one silver monolithic kind of look, again, the sort of the Apple way, we challenge that, with materials and textures that are varied, things that are much more sensory, and things you can feel, and this whole notion of bent and bent metal, for example, is a process we invented at Jawbone. So there is, Jawbone is one example of the fact that technology can be integrated into our lives in a way that is expressed by design in a different way. It's not about being better, or it's not about being, like something else. It's about building your own reference points, building your own technologies, your own way of making things, and your own way of connecting with the consumer.
Do we have the images? Can we see?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can move forward to certain things. This was this is the latest, the big jam box. But
so tell us about Jawbone and your relationship with them, because you are not just a freelance designer they hire in when they've got a product launch coming up, are you? It's you're a bit more involved in the corporate structure, in the...
A little bit or a lot, yeah. Well, I've been working with Jawbone for 10 years in a partnership model, which means that I'm one of the executives in the company who essentially who is part of every decision that's being taken. I'm at the same level with, the chief financial officer, for example, or the chief technology officer. And that allows me to understand everything that's going on in the company, where we can invest into things, when we can create new, new lines of business, or where we can find new opportunities. So my role is essentially to be the chief creative of a growing, business, and from making kind of, essential products to kind of stretching them into new dimensions of customization. For example, this is a customization engine that allows people to decide what colors and what textures they want to combine on the Jambox, which became the #1 selling speaker in America, #1 selling speaker at all the Apple stores, etc. And then also stretching the brand into cultural places, having it be a mainstream product, and at the same time having it be a product that can be experienced in a sort of gallery setting. This is a project we did together around sound and assembling 1,600 Jamboxes into these structures. So my role is to just stretch the company into new areas where where design can play a role, and where the brand can be presented in the right way. And the latest, and what we're still working on, is this wearability. How technology is becoming wearable, and how technology is giving you important data about how you live, and how your sleep cycles or your movement. So this is a device that allows you to keep track of how much you move, how much you sleep.
So this is the thing on your wrist here, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this.
So this is called the Up Bracelet, and it's a quantified self device, which allows you to track your activity, track your sleep. You can even see the difference between your light sleep and your deep sleep. And also you can keep track of your friends or loved ones, or your team, as we call it, like a sports team in a way. You can kind of tell them to do more, to get off the couch, or you can encourage them if they're running or doing physical activity.
And this is one of the key areas in which design is changing in the 21st century, isn't it? Because in the 20th century, technology was kind of in its own box. It was the computer.
Right.
Even a smartphone is really, it's like it's a communication device. But you're not
Right.
now talking about things where technology is embedded in your life. It helps you monitor what's happening in your life, helps
Sure.
you make decisions. So tell us a bit about how technology and what we think of as 3D design, clothing, this could be seen as a piece of jewelry that's smart. I mean, how far can this merger between dimensionality and technology take us? And give us some examples.
What I find exciting is exactly this notion that computers or our experience, for example, of the internet or things that happen just on screens or in boxes is really going to go away. What we call the Internet of Things, which is the data and the knowledge and the search and the experiences that we have on the internet is becoming things that we wear, things that we put on our heads, on our bodies, in our shoes. And so, for me, what's interesting is rather than having to ask technology to do something for you, pressing a button or looking for something on a phone, I think where technology is going is that it's becoming more and more embedded into our lives. So anticipating what we want, anticipating our needs, and in a way responding not so much to what we want the technology to do for us, but rather responding to what we need in a way that is going to be a lot more seamless.
And are you working on any products in that area? Are you working with any companies that you can tell us about?
Yes, I am working on companies I can't tell you about.
But elaborate on this a bit more. So technology is becoming embedded more in products that surround us. It's sort of escaping from the computer and sort of leaking onto our clothes and our furniture and so on and so forth. How else is technology changing the world, and how else, as a designer like you, helping to embed the forefront of technology into companies?
So one thing that I've been really excited about, and we've built a user interface, user experience group in the studio, is how digital products, the products that we kind of touch with our fingers right now on surfaces, such as a phone, for example, how these products are so similar to designing physical products. When you think about the identity of something, the way it looks, when you think about functionality, where to touch it, where to transform, this piece of furniture or this object. When you think about, the 10-foot view, the sort of iconography from 10 feet or 15 feet. When you think about, the textures and the discovery that happen at closer touch. All those notions are exactly the same, whether you're doing a hardware product or whether you're doing a software product, whether you're doing a physical button interface, or whether you're doing organizing the functionality of an app, for example. So what I've been really interested in is when these things get designed together as one, really new, interesting paradigms, really new, interesting experiences are happening. And let me just say one thing here, probably that's going to be a little bit provocative. Nobody's really doing that today. Even Apple is designing their product and their software separately, right? I mean, the skeuomorphism that you find in user interface on Apple products, the faux leather, on the calendar, etc., that's not on the hardware product, right? So designing these two things as one at the same time is really a completely new, really fascinating exercise for me as a designer. I mean, I'm so excited about it. It's just the same when you design a piece of furniture. You think about the foam that's inside and how it's going to respond to the body, and also the way it looks on the outside, the shape of it. And think about the fact that technology is designed completely separately, as if, the way this chair feels is when I sit in it, when I feel it, when I experience it, as if somebody else was designing that part, and then a designer was designing the outer look of it, right? So that's a whole new, sort of blue ocean for us as designers. It's a new frontier.
Let's rewind back a bit, because you mentioned this term skeuomorphism, and that means in Apple devices, people particularly go on about it. Like, you have this sophisticated glass and aluminium phone, and then the diary's got leather grain on it, and the bookshelf is made to look like wood. I mean, what's that all about? Is that a kind of a design failure, or is that, my understanding of it is they use those languages because your brain is configured to expect leather in a diary, so it puts you in a diary type.
Yeah, but you could use the exact same explanation for a hardware product. You could say, well, you know, I don't know what a tablet is. I've never used a tablet. Let's make it look like a book, or let's make it look like, you know, my leather-bound, you know, notepad. Obviously, they didn't go there with the hardware. So why did they go there with the software? Is a, you know, really good question. And you know, there's now many companies that are looking at it in a way that is quite interesting. And Apple actually is a little behind in that area.
And so what is the way forward then? You're saying you reject the notion of making a smartphone diary look like a leather desk-bound diary, but so what does it look like? Or what is the approach that leads to the answer to that question?
Well, I think the approach that I'm talking about is to actually design both these elements at the same time. Design the interface and the hardware at the same time. So you really think about, for example, what is the mood, what is the, you know, what is the appropriate color, what is the appropriate arrangement of function for this calendar. Let's say, you know, a calendar on a tablet or on a phone. You know, what is, you know, what are the emotions that go with that? You know, how do I feel stressed or challenged by the complexity of a calendar? You know, do I need to divide it in, for example, we're working on a calendar right now. Do I need to divide it in hours, or is my first view just a view about, should I just know what's happening in the morning and the afternoon, and as I zoom in, I can see more detail? Because if not, if I'm looking at my calendar, I freak out. I mean, you know, there's 15 different things I'm supposed to do in a day. But if I know that in general, what I'm doing in the morning is this, I'm in the office brainstorming with a team on 12 projects, but that's okay. I'm just in the office brainstorming with a team. And in the afternoon, I have a trip down, you know, to visit a factory or a client. And I can see kind of in broad strokes, right? So maybe there's a different way to look at the calendar rather than the paper, you know, the traditional paper schedule where, you know.
So in a way, referring back to the memory of the paper calendar is holding us back because that has a limitation and the technology can do so much more. But by using that form factor, it's setting boundaries.
The opportunities are, you know, are there, and the fact that we are not taking these opportunities as designers, I think it is lazy.
Does this have a name, this idea, this notion of bringing together software design and physical design at the same time? I mean, skeuomorphism is the opposite, is what you're rejecting.
Right. Good design?
I think we'll have to come up with a better term than that. But and have any successful iterations of this come out yet from your studio or any others? Can you talk about something that does this job really well, that brings these two things together?
I can't point at like existing products, but I have demo products that we're working on. For example, on my phone right now, around sports and physical activity. That are, I think, pretty interesting. There's some calendar work we're doing. There's also work that we're doing on the $100 laptop. We're about to launch the tablet version of the $100 laptop, and we are working on a set. First of all, a general interface. How do children navigate, you know, 100 applications, 100 different learning tools? How do you organize these tools? How do you you know, how do you make them, I think I'm going to have to go all the way through back. Oh. Thanks. So, you know, how you get, for example, you know, here there is a theme which is, you know, children want to be something. So, you know, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a mathematician. And you sort of have that as an entry point to then arranging, you know, the apps around math. So
this is a screen from the latest version of the $100 laptop?
These are 4 different screens, yeah, things we're working on.
So tell us about
there's a lot of apps that we're working on as well. around education, around learning, geometry, around learning, about nature, for example.
Tell us about the $100 laptop. Tell us about that project, how it came about, and what it's doing.
Sure. So the $100 laptop I've been working on for about 7 years. We launched in 2007 the first version. There's been 4 upgrades since then of this guy. We have 3 million laptops in the hands of children. This is actually in Peru, where there's 1 million laptops in the hands of school children. And in neighboring Uruguay, every child between the age of 6 years old and 18 years old actually has one, is using the laptop. We have, I think, developments in 30 or 40 countries, and some very exciting ones now in Africa as well. I think Africa was our first kind of target for the project, but South America was much more politically ready in a way, and from an infrastructure, much more ready when we launched. So there's now kind of bigger developments going on in Africa. And the next version is a tablet, which we've been working on for a while, and we'll have some good announcements in a couple of months on that.
So that's something that's going to be launched quite soon.
Yeah.
And the $100 laptop, just to remind everybody, was a project to make computers accessible to parts of the world that wouldn't normally be able to afford a...
Exactly, to the developing world. I mean, if you think about a country, any country outside of, the sort of traditional Western countries we think about, if you think about Uruguay or Peru or Ethiopia, how do you digitize your population? If you are trying to sort of teach, computing to, your university students when they're 25 years old, you've missed 95% of your population. And you've missed all the learning that happens when you're 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, when you're learning how to code, when you're learning how to explore, when you're learning all of that. So in a way, it's a way to digitize, to teach all those skills to an entire population at a very affordable cost.
You've become associated with the notion of sustainable design, sustainability, and I guess this is sort of social sustainability, isn't it? It's giving opportunities to people that may not otherwise have them. Tell us a little bit about what your vision of sustainable design is and what it means.
Well, for me, what's interesting what's interesting in sustainability is that it's a progression. But if we look at 20 years from now, there is not one industry that has to retool itself to be simply more sustainable. And the problem is, if you look at all of our manufacturing facilities and all of our industrial sites, those are the places that need to be retooled and rethought. And there is no doubt in my mind that this is work that is happening and will be happening. So while industry is thinking about retooling itself to be more efficient, to respond to a consumer demand that products be sustainable and use less energy and cost less, etc. While they're retooling themselves, there's a huge opportunity for us designers to participate in that. Because when you're rethinking about how to use materials, how to produce goods, really design is a big part of that. So my sense is that we need to be very much embedded into efforts of retooling industry, retooling companies, because we need to, kind of move, help, industry move in those places in ways where, better design is going to come out of this shift.
And what is the definition of sustainability then? Is it using less resources? Is it having less things in the world? Because there's a kind of a paradox of a designer talking about sustainability, because a designer's job is to bring new objects into being.
Well, the most interesting places to be, I think, in life in general, is at the center of a paradox. And I think there's a few, design is in a few of those types of paradox. For example, design is regarded as a luxurious practice. it is often celebrated as the objects for the few, and a level of kind of refinement, and that makes things just simply extremely expensive. So design in a way is often disconnected from its intent, which is really to reach, I believe, a majority, to reach as many people as possible. So that's an interesting paradox, for design to be in that place. I personally believe that attainability is extremely important, and the more we can create high quality and sustainable products that are attainable for the largest number, the more we're advancing the idea that sustainability is actually the way forward for business and for people in general. And this is like the most important. My definition of good design is that good design, really, helps move forward the ideas, the upcoming ideas, the ideas of the 21st century, and so for me, that's what good design does. It accelerates the adoption of these new ideas, and so our role is as designers is to do exactly that.
Can you tell us about and show us any of the designs that you've done that you're proud of in terms of sustainability?
So the Clever Little Bag is an interesting project with Puma, and it took us about 3 years to build, to retool essentially the Puma factories in order for all around the world, because this has, they make shoes all around the world, 80 million shoes, and we were able to reduce the amount of materials and the amount of energy used in making shoe boxes by 65%, and eliminate all chemicals, for example, printing chemicals, out of the process. I don't have another slide that explains how it works, but it's a very flimsy, very thin recycled cardboard piece that is essentially held in place by a recycled PET material on the outside. And the combination of these two creates the structure that is needed for shoes to travel on boats and to travel on conveyor belts at distribution centers, et cetera, and to protect the shoes also in transport. What happens in store has been fascinating, because we have been able to almost get rid of the plastic bag, those vinyl plastic bags that we don't know what to do with, because a Clever Little Bag gets used then in purchase, after the purchase, to take the shoes home. So this is like one of these projects where initially it's not very glamorous. Every designer wants to design the next, super cool collection of shoes for Puma or Nike, right? But that's a temporary project. That's a project that's going to get a lot of press. That's a project that's going to get you at some fun openings, and that's a project that's going to last, what, 2 seasons, 3 seasons, maybe a year, right? And that will be gone. So this was, I actually got really excited, because I thought, if we're able to retool the whole company to make 80 million shoe boxes that are going to ship all these shoes, that's a first start for something that will have longevity, an outcome that will last a long time.
So how does a project like that come about? Did Puma approach you and say, we want you to design a cool trainer and we'll invite you to loads of cool parties? And so you said, no, actually, let's look a bit deeper, or how did it come about?
Well, I've been having, we've done projects with Puma for a few years, and we've been having that dialogue. So they, those ideas have, when you work with people for a long time, you start to know, who, how, what fascinates you, what excites you. And the previous CEO at Puma, who had been there for 15 years, was extremely interested in sustainability, was somebody who was deeply committed to creating a platform called Puma Safe for both a social engagement platform, a social platform, and a sustainability platform for the company. And this became, in a way, like the project by which all of that strategy was revealed. And so they came to me with a question, which I think those are the best projects, meaning nobody knew whether this was possible before they came to us. And projects that start with a question are, you know, the best projects for me, because most projects come with a brief and the answers are already contained in the brief. So if Puma had come to me and said, we want to reduce our, you know, our energy and material output in our shoeboxes by 10 to 20% by 2020, but yeah, you know, 10 years from when we, or 12 years from when we started this project, that's what we would have done. But instead they came to us with a question, and they simply said, we don't know that we can make this shoebox better. The shoebox they had previously worked miracles for them. It was this big red shoebox, and it had like a lot of bright colors, and you could see it from afar. It was the best branded shoebox out there. They took their most successful, you know, probably piece of signage in a way, and they said, well, can we do something else with it? Question mark. And, you know, with the hope that maybe there was a possibility to do something different, but with but with no specific expectation. And I think that's why it turned out so good, because we actually really kind of threw the ball really far when it comes to design, and really had to you know, work really hard for 3 years with, you know, German logistics engineers. Think about those 3 words, you know, for them to change, you know, an entire ecosystem of manufacturing for them.
You seem to have quite sustainable relationships with the companies you work for. You talked about 10 years with Puma, Jawbone since the beginning. Yeah. Do you think that the design world is a bit short-termist in general? They'll sort of, as you said, get a designer in to cause a splash at the Milan Furniture Fair or the fashion show or whatever, and then there's a thing and it gets in the magazines, and then the relationship disappears, and both parties go back to doing what they're used to doing. I mean, do you think that there's something wrong in that approach?
Well, here's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in doing the best possible work, and that's all that is interesting to me. And if I think about how I work with clients over a long period of time, how things get better, how they understand me better, I'm able to sort of embed important notions for us in the business over a period of time, how I understand their markets and their goals so much better after 3, 4, 5 years. You know, with Jawbone, I'm thinking Jawbone every day for the last 10 years. So I'm the most senior person on the Jawbone team that's been the longest there, outside of the founder. I think or with Herman Miller, it's the same. I've been working with them for now 11 years, and I'm able to do, and we don't have to brief each other so much. I mean, they come, you know, I may come to Herman Miller or Jawbone with an idea, as much as they may come to me with an idea. And we agree to explore that idea together, rather than just this being a brief, you know, a strict kind of brief and deadline-driven kind of relationship. I mean, of course, there are goals and there are things that we're trying to achieve, and there's, you know, there are briefs of sorts, but we always expand them because we understand the area that they want to play in, and also what their overall goals are. So in those long-term relationships, for me, simply that's when the best design work happens. If I didn't have a relationship with Puma, there's no way we would have worked for 3.5 years, you know, diligently to launch this. I mean, people get tired and kind of move away and go to the next thing.
If a brand approached you and said, hey, Yves, we love your work, we just want you to do something that will get us loads of press attention, would you walk away from it, or what would your response be? Well,
I think the press attention has, if the press attention has an aim, has a goal, right? It's to tell a new story about who this company is, about what they believe, about the rest of their sustainability or social platform, then there's nothing wrong with press attention. If it's just, you know, if you're collecting 10 designers just for their names, to make a splash somewhere, and it is not part at all of a long-term change within the company or really a new story you're trying to tell. I think that's a little bit of waste of the press attention. But you know, there's nothing wrong with us designers admitting that we are an important component, and sometimes the most important component, in a story being told in the right way. Because you know, you know, companies are finally starting to realize that actually the designer's work is what people are experiencing firsthand. It's not the advertising, right? It's not the marketing. How people are talking about a product is when they, you know, look at it and feel it and take it into their homes and use it. I mean, we are in a completely new place compared to the, you know, advertising-driven world, you know, we lived in the 80s and the 90s. We're in a world where people are doing their own reviews, where people are, communicate directly with companies, when people market actually products simply by endorsing them and liking them and giving them a good name, you know, on in a digital sense, you know, in the social sphere that we experience.
When we were talking last week on the phone about today, you sent me a little statement that you'd written, and it started off, design is generous, advertising is not generous, marketing is not generous. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that what gets me and all my designer friends up in the morning is really about creating something that will have a certain meaning in somebody's life. And you know, what gets us up in the morning is, you know, to create a new experience, to create something that is, you know, that is significant. And it isn't to sell something that's already there. It's really to create, and when you create, you're giving. And to me, the most important part of the profession of design is that it is a giving profession. You're trying to give something, make something that that many more people will experience, not just you.
Thanks so much, Yves. Thanks so much for coming. Sorry we don't have any more time for questions. Big round of applause for Yves. It's been a fascinating talk.
Thank you.